The blizzard had blown itself out an hour before dawn, and Marjorie Holt walked the high moor road with a hooded lantern and the grey sledge ropes coiled at her shoulder, because 3 days of weather meant 3 days of no news, and the silence on the high country was wrong. She kept walking. The drift past the crooked larch had taken a shape that was not a drift. A wheel stood up out of the snow like a black sun. Below it the coach lay on its broken side, the body cracked open at the joint of door and frame, the offside front wheel wedged at an angle no road could have made. The lead horse was gone, bolted or cut loose, she could not yet tell. The wheeler was dead in the traces with its eyes open. A man lay face down in the snow 8 yards from the coach, one arm stretched as if he had crawled the last yard before the cold took him. Pickering, she thought, by the cut of the caped coat. She did not need to turn him over. She kept walking. Inside the broken coach, a second man lay half buried under a slipped seat. His face was turned toward her, the colour of skimmed milk. His leg was bent wrong. There was blood in the hair above his right ear. He was very young. She put her gloved hand under his jaw. A pulse moved against her fingers, faint as a moth. "Right," Marjorie said aloud, to the empty moor and the dead horse and the dead coachman and the dawn-blue snow. "Right then." She set the lantern in the drift, ran back through her own footprints to the broken cross at the bend in the road, and brought the long grey sledge through the loose snow at a half-run. Holt's Cross stood alone where the moor road began its slow fall toward the village of Wilford-on-the-Moor, 4 miles below the cross and 7 below the ducal seat. Her father, William Holt, had built the inn with his own hands 40 years before, on the strength of a soldier's pension and a hard marriage, and he had named it for the stone cross at the crossroad that had stood there before the coaching companies and the turnpikes and the gentry's interest in faster post. The cross was older than the road. He had told her, when she was small, that the inn would outlast the road and would outlast her too if she kept it standing. She had kept it standing 3 winters now. Marjorie dragged the sledge through the door of the tap room, and Mrs. Eliza Brindle, who had cooked at Holt's Cross for 22 years and had kept the kitchen for her father before her, dropped the iron poker into the hearth ash and said only, "Mercy. Help me lift him." They lifted him together. The young man weighed less than he should have. His good boots were torn at the seam from the wreck, and the leg below the torn breeches was already swelling, the bone beneath the skin set wrong. Annie came down the back stair in her shift, 4 years old and silent as she always was, and stood watching from the 3rd step with her thumb in her mouth and her dark eyes very large. "Go back up, child," Mrs. Brindle said. Annie did not move. "Let her stay," Marjorie said, and Mrs. Brindle did not argue, because nobody argued with Marjorie in her own inn. They laid him on the long deal table in the kitchen because the kitchen was warm, and the light from the hearth was the best light in the house for setting a leg. Marjorie cut the breeches up the seam with the kitchen shears. Mrs. Brindle held the lamp. "Pickering is dead," Marjorie said. "Tell Tom when he comes in." "God rest him. And the wheeler, the lead horse is gone. And this one, concussion, broken tibia, fever coming." She said it the way her husband Thomas had once said the names of the bottles on his master's shelf. Flat, accurate, the only honesty she had to give to the dying. Thomas had died at 21 of typhus he had brought home from his master's northern rounds. Marjorie had been 22. Her father had followed 8 months later, of nothing the village doctor could name, though Marjorie had named it grief. Plainly, of a kind no golden seal would reach. She had not allowed herself a single Sunday since. She set the leg. It took both her hands and the weight of her shoulder. Mrs. Brindle did not look. Annie did. The young man did not wake, only made a small dry sound from somewhere far below his throat, as if from another room of himself. Marjorie splinted the leg with a length of cleaved birch she had trimmed herself the autumn before. She bound it. She washed the head wound with willow bark water and set a hot stone at the soles of his feet. The whole business took an hour and a half. When she straightened, the small of her back hurt. Her hands were shaking, and Mrs. Brindle was crying without sound. "Who is he?" Mrs. Brindle said. Marjorie had been through his coat already. The coat was good. The cuffs were turned, and the lining was good Yorkshire wool. There had been a letter in the inner pocket addressed to a Mr. Edmund Carraway at the King's Arms in Doncaster, which was a false name as plainly as if it had been written so, because the cuff of the coat had a small embroidered W beneath the silk lining, where no servant would ever look, and the signet she had felt with her thumb through the lining of the breast pocket had weight to it. A real signet, a heavy one, hidden. "He is somebody's trouble," she said. "And ours now." Tom Reedman came in from the stables, 16 and red-cheeked from the air. He had been her father's last apprentice, kept on after her father's death because he had nowhere else to go, and because the dead coachman Pickering had been teaching him the road. He stopped in the kitchen door. "That is Mr. Pickering's coach," he said. "Yes." "Mr. Pickering, dead, in the drift past the larch. We will fetch him when the wind drops." Tom looked at the man on the table for a long moment, and Marjorie watched his face go through what hers had gone through an hour before. "The wheel," he said. "What about the wheel?" "That wheel did not fail of itself. I helped Mr. Pickering set that coach at the yard at York a fortnight back. There was nothing wrong with the offside." Marjorie wiped her hands on her apron. "Tom, listen to me. When the wind drops and the road firms, you go back to the wreck before the snow goes. You bring me anything that came off that wheel. You bring me the pin if you can find it. And you do not tell a soul where you have been or what I have asked you to do. Not Mrs. Brindle, not the boy at the smithy, not the vicar. Are you listening?" "Yes." "Good lad." She turned back to the table and put her palm against the young man's forehead. He was beginning to burn. "Annie," she said, without turning round, "come and bring me the willow tin from the dresser." Annie came down the stair with the tin held very carefully in both hands, and Marjorie thought, as she had thought every morning of every day for a year, that the child was hers now, whether the parish liked it or not, and that the inn was hers, and that whatever this hidden young man on her kitchen table was about to cost her, she would pay it the way she paid everything, alone and without complaining of it. Sir Rowland Carrow, the baronet whose offers for Holt's Cross she had returned unread since her father's death, would have spat at the sight of her in his parlour, and yet for 2 months past his man of business had been writing from York, twice a week, raising the price. The inn was a piece of the road, and the road was a piece of Wilford, and Sir Rowland, by every account anyone brought through her taproom, was Wilford in all but name. The wind picked up again against the shutters. It was going to keep them closed. They carried him up to the small east bedroom on a hurdle of stretched sacking strung between 2 poles from the stable. The stair was narrow at the turn, and Mrs. Brindle held the lamp at her shoulder, while Marjorie took the head, because the head was where the danger was, and because she was the stronger of the two even now. They laid him on the rope-strung bed beneath the casement, and Annie brought up the willow tin a second time, unbidden, and set it on the deep sill beside the small empty water jug. He woke once that first morning. His eyes opened on the ceiling beams. They were grey, the colour of slate just out from under rain, and for a long moment they did not gather. Marjorie was wringing out a cloth in the basin at the foot of the bed. She felt his look before she saw it. "Where?" he said. It was barely a word. "Holt's Cross, the coaching inn on the Moor road. You wrecked. You are inside." "Pickering. Dead. I'm sorry." He took a breath that was almost a sound and closed his eyes against it, and Marjorie saw him try and fail to keep his face still. There was a working at the corner of his mouth, very small. "How long?" he said. "Since dawn. It is past noon." "Road. Closed. 3 feet of new snow on the moor. The mail will not come up for a week at the soonest." He was quiet for some time. She thought he had gone again. Then he said, very low and very clear, "Do not put a name on me." She set the cloth on the basin's rim. She kept her hand on it. "I had not meant to." His eyes opened again, found her face, held there. "You went through the coat," he said. "I had to know what kind of trouble I was lifting." "And what kind am I?" "The kind that travels under a wrong name with a real seal in his lining." He breathed once, slowly. Something in his face that had been bracing eased about a 1/4 inch. "Mistress Holt, Marjorie Holt, the innkeeper here." "Mistress Holt, the man who sent that coach." He shut his eyes. The words were costing him. "The man who sent that coach is not done with it. When the road clears, his men will come up looking for a body. Mine. If they find me sitting up at your fire, I am no better off than I am in the drift. Then we will not let them find you sitting up at my fire. His eyes opened again, and stayed on her face a long beat. You believe me. I believe the wheel. My stable boy was the apprentice of your dead coachman. He saw the cut already this morning before he saw your face. Now lie still and drink what I give you. We can be afraid of all the rest of it tomorrow. He drank what she gave him. He slept. The fever came up that afternoon as she had told Mrs. Brindle it would, and by the second morning his lips were cracked and he was speaking in a low, fast slur to people who were not in the room, naming a man called Roland twice in one breath, and a woman she took for his mother once very softly. Marjorie wrote nothing down. She wrote nothing down all that fortnight, but she kept what she heard at the back of her teeth. Tom Reedman went back to the wreck on the third clear day, on foot, with a long iron rake from the stable and a pair of her father's old shooting gloves. He came home before dark with a piece of bright iron the size of his palm wrapped twice in oilcloth and tucked inside his shirt. He set it on the deal table without a word, and Marjorie, standing at the kitchen hearth with a cup of beef broth in her hand, looked at it for a long moment before she lifted it. The cut face of the pin was angled, fresh and bright. Wheelwright's work, Tom said. You are sure? I am sure. Road wear breaks long. This breaks short and clean and on the wrong axis. Somebody wanted the offside to go on a hill. Marjorie wrapped the pin again in the same oilcloth and added a layer of her father's old chamois, and she carried it up to the small east bedroom and put it under the rope mattress at the head, where she would feel it if she sat. The man on the bed did not wake. She stood over him a long time. She was not yet certain whether what she felt for him was pity or something else, and she would not let herself ask. She had a leg to keep clean and a fever to keep down, and pity was an indulgence the woman who had kept this in 3 winters alone could not yet afford. That evening at the kitchen hearth she sat with Annie on her lap and the child's head against her collarbone, and she felt the small bright pin under her own ribs as if she had swallowed it. There was no retreat. She had already lifted him. The fever lasted 4 days. A routine established itself in the silence that the closed road made of the house. Mrs. Brindle baked the bread and salted the last of the autumn pork, and kept Annie at the kitchen hearth with a cup and a wooden spoon. Tom Reedman fed the 3 remaining horses, watered them, and came up the back stair once an hour to ask in a low voice if she needed anything brought. Marjorie slept in a chair beside the small east bedroom, and woke when the man on the bed changed his breathing. She set the splint twice in the night, when he kicked against the bedpost, and once more on the third morning, when the swelling went down, and the binding needed taking up. She fed him broth from a horn spoon. She washed him with cloths warmed at the small grate. She kept the fire fed and the willow tin full and Annie's pallet by the grate where the child could see her if she woke. She did not pray. She had not prayed since Thomas. She did the work, and the work, mostly, was its own form of asking. He came up on the 5th day. It was an evening of slow, pale light, the wind off the moor low for the first time in a week, and Marjorie had been sitting with her elbows on the deep sill watching the casement go from grey to blue. When she turned, his eyes were open and lucid in a way they had not been since the first morning. The skin of his face was new again, thinner than it had been, the cheekbones unmistakable now under it. The grey eyes were quieter. There was a small living person behind them. She did not speak. She waited. "You kept me," he said. It was the lowest sentence she had ever heard out of a grown man. "I did the work that needed doing." "That is what I said." His mouth moved, the smallest possible thing. "You kept me." She set the cloth on the basin and came to the bed, and sat on the edge of it without asking, because they were past asking. She put 2 fingers against his pulse at the wrist. The pulse was slow and quiet and exactly where it was supposed to be. "Edmund," he said. "I know." "Edmund Carrow, of Wilford. I came of age 23 days ago. I was on the road to confront my uncle. He is my legal regent until I am seated in my father's house. He is also the man who paid the wheelwright at York." I had supposed. My father died in a hunting accident on the Wilford estate when I was 12. My mother died of grief 2 years later. My uncle has been the regent and the trustee of the estate for 10 years. I have not been able to do a thing about him for 10 years. I came of age and I started for Wilford, and his man sent the coach." She was quiet. "My turn," she said. "My name is Marjorie Holt. I am the daughter of William Holt, who built this inn. My husband, Thomas Holt, was an apothecary's apprentice. He died of typhus on a Tuesday in the spring after our marriage. I was 22. My father died of nothing in particular 8 months later. I have run the inn alone for 3 years. The child by the kitchen fire is Annie. She was left at my door last winter without a name in her shawl. She is mine." He listened. He did not interrupt. When she had finished, he closed his eyes for a moment and opened them again. "How old is the child?" 4. "And there is no one but you." "There is Mrs. Brindle and Tom Reedman. They are mine in the way a household is, but there is no one of my name." He turned his hand on the coverlet, and his fingers came open. He did not ask for hers. He simply opened the hand and let it lie. After a long moment she put hers over it, and they sat that way for a while in the small east bedroom with the casement going blue. "Why are you helping me?" he said. "Because you were not dead yet." "That is not all of it." "It is most of it. The rest is that I have been told once already this winter, by a man in a town carriage, that Sir Rowland Carrow would like to be quit of me. I had not put a face on the reason. I have one now." He took the answer in without a word. "He has been trying to buy your inn. For a year. The offers raise every quarter. He needs the road. He needs the road, and he needs there to be no woman on the road who is not in his pocket. I had not understood why he should care so much. Now I do." The hand under hers moved. The fingers closed, very gently. "I will keep this off you," he said, "when I can stand. You cannot keep anything off me from a sick room. Sleep." He slept. She kept her hand under his for some time after, then took it back and put another stick on the fire. On the 7th day he was sitting up against the bolster, and on the 8th he was eating bread from the table. On the 9th he came down the back stair on his good leg, with his hand on Tom Reedman's shoulder, and sat at the kitchen hearth and ate Mrs. Brindle's soup at the deal table, and Annie, who had not spoken to anyone in the household but Marjorie for a year, came round the corner of the dresser and stood at his good knee and watched him eat. He looked at her with a stillness that was not awkwardness. "Hello," he said, very quietly. Annie put her hand on the seam of his sleeve. "My name is Edmund," he said. "Annie," Mrs. Brindle prompted gently from the hearth, but Annie did not say it. Annie only kept her small palm flat on the cuff of his coat where the embroidered W was hidden, as if she knew already, and looked up into his face, and after a moment a smile of remarkable seriousness crossed his mouth. "Good," he said. "I know who you are." Marjorie had to turn away to the hearth and pretend to stir the pot. On the 10th day he could put weight on the splint with a long stick under his arm, and on the 11th he was at the kitchen table with the inn's ledger open before him, marking errors of arithmetic in her father's handwriting from the last summer of his life. He had a hand for figures, plainly. He had also kept his own counsel since the first morning about everything but the bare facts. He did not press her about Thomas. He did not ask whose foundling Annie was, and he did not name his uncle a third time. Marjorie noticed this and was grateful for it. That evening Mrs. Brindle put Annie to bed, and Tom went out to the stables with a lantern, and Marjorie and Edmund Carrow sat alone in the kitchen with the fire low, and the small soft sound of snow beginning to shift on the slate above them, and for the first time since he had come down out of the small east bedroom, they were quiet together without either of them working. "I cannot stay here past the thaw," he said. "I know. When the road clears, his men will come." "I know that too. If they find me alive in your inn, you will be the next thing they—" "Edmund," he stopped. "I have known what your uncle would do to me from the moment I lifted you off my kitchen table," she said. "I did it anyway. Stay until you can stand a day's coach to York. We will solve what comes when it comes." The fire shifted. Annie's pallet by the grate was empty. The child was upstairs. Edmund Carrow looked at Marjorie Holt across the deal table for a long time, and what was in his face was not yet anything she could name, and was certainly nothing that either of them would have permitted themselves to speak. But he nodded, slowly, and said, For now. For now, Marjorie agreed, and she stood up to bank the fire because if she did not stand up she was going to do something she would not be able to take back. It was on the 13th morning, an hour after a thin red sun came up over the moor and the road firmed under a frost, that Mrs. Brindle came up the back stair at a half-run with the colour gone out of her face. "There is a coach in the yard." Marjorie was on her feet before the sentence ended. "Whose?" "3 riders. 1 coach. Liveried. Wilford livery, mistress. The man at the door says he is Sir Rowland Caro's steward, and that he has come up the road from the wreck." Edmund Caro was at the deal table with the ledger open. He set the pen down very carefully and looked up at Marjorie, and the look that passed between them was the look of 2 people who had been preparing for this hour for 13 days, and had not believed in their bones that they would have to live through it. "Down the cellar," Marjorie said. "Now. Bring the ledger. Bring nothing else. Tom—" "I'll keep the backyard," Tom said from the kitchen door, where he had already appeared, white-faced and steady. "Mrs. Brindle, greet the gentleman at the front. Take his coat. Pour him my father's brandy from the small bottle. Tell him I am at the wash-house and will come directly. Buy me 4 minutes." "Yes, mistress." Marjorie had Edmund down the cellar steps in 2 minutes flat, his bad leg held against her shoulder, the long stick under his other arm. The cellar was a low, arched stone room with a packed earth floor and a single small grating to the backyard. It smelt of apples and cold iron. She set him on an up-ended barrel in the back corner behind the salt cask, where the grating would not throw light on him, and she put her father's old riding coat over his shoulders against the cold. "Do not move. Do not cough. Do not look up at the grating. Whatever you hear above, do not move." "Marjorie." "What?" "If he names me—" "He will not. He thinks you are under a drift. Be quiet." She turned to go, and his hand caught her wrist. It was not strong, but it was sure. "There is a sealed strong box," he said, "under the 3rd flagstone from the wall. My father set it here in 1817. My father's man of business is a Mr. Septimus Hollis in York. The strong box is the original Wilford estate ledgers. My father knew. He knew when I was 9. He knew." She had not breathed for the count of 3. "Your father set—" "Here, in your father's inn, the 3rd flagstone." "Why did my father never—" "Because your father told no one. That was the point." She stared at him for 1/2 second more, and then she crossed the cellar floor without speaking and put the toe of her boot against the 3rd flagstone from the wall. It moved. It had been set on a bed of sand. She marked it with her own glove dropped beside it for the eye to find later, and she went up the cellar stair at a walk, because a run would have been heard above. Sir Rowland Caro's steward was a thin, neat man of about 40 in a heavy travelling coat, standing at her taproom hearth with her father's small brandy, untouched in his hand. He was called Mr. Barrow. He bowed when she came in, which was a courtesy he need not have paid her, and she understood at once that he had been told to be courteous, because the master had not yet decided whether to buy her in or burn it. "Mistress Holt." "Mr. Barrow, you are welcome at Holt's Cross. You will forgive the state of the tap-room. We have been closed since the blizzard." "You will forgive my errand, then. A coach was wrecked on this road on the night of the 4th. We have only this week been able to ride up from Wilford. The coach was His Grace the Duke of Wilford's, travelling north under a private name. Mr. Pickering, the coachman, has been recovered from the snow above the larch. He has been carried down. The coach itself is at the wreck. The young gentleman is not." She did not blink. She kept her hands open at her sides. "There was a gentleman. You found him?" "I found a body, sir, on the morning of the 5th, a young man in good travelling dress. He had not been alive when I came on him. There was no breath. I had no means to bring a second body in, the wind being what it was. I covered him with sacking and a length of canvas from the coach, and I made for the inn. By the time the wind eased, it had drifted heavily, and when my stable boy went back, he was not where you left him." "He was not. The drift past the larch is 12 feet now. He will come up at the thaw. I'm sorry, sir. He was very young." She said it the way she had once told the village curate that Thomas was dead. Flat, accurate, the only honesty she had. Mr. Barrow watched her face for a long beat. She let him. "You did not bring him in." "Sir, I could not have carried him. The wheeler was dead, and I could not free the lead. I am a woman alone on this road. I did what I could." "You went through his coat?" "I took a letter from the inner pocket addressed to a gentleman at Doncaster. I have it for you. I took nothing else." She produced the letter she had taken from Edmund's coat on the first morning, and Mr. Barrow turned it once in his hand and put it inside his own coat without reading the direction. "His Grace's signet," he said. "There was no signet in the coat. The man you describe was robbed, sir, either in the wreck or before." A flicker in Mr. Barrow's face. He had not been told to expect that answer, and he could not contradict it without saying things he could not say. He set the brandy down untasted. "I will look at the cellar," he said pleasantly, as a matter of form. "You will not, sir?" He raised an eyebrow. "I have a child upstairs," Marjorie said, "and a household that has been at sickness with the lung fever since the first night the snow came down. My cook is 2 days out of her bed. My stable boy has been coughing blood. I have buried one husband and one father in this house, sir, and I am not having my tap-room and my cellar walked through by 3 strange men out of Wilford on the day the road first opens to a courtesy I did not ask for. You may look at the wreck, and you may take Mr. Pickering's poor body down with my full blessing. You will not look at my cellar." He held her eye. She held his. "The Duke will come up at the Thaw, sir. The whole Moor will come up at the Thaw. I will send to Wilford the moment a body shows. You have my word as my father's daughter. It is the only word I have, and it is worth what you came up the road to find." It was the longest speech she had ever made to anyone. She had not raised her voice once. Mr. Barrow looked at her for what felt like a slow count of 20. Then he picked up the brandy and tossed it back in one swallow. "My master will hear of your assistance, Mistress Holt. I do not doubt it. We will send up the parish coffin for Mr. Pickering tonight. You will find him in the cold house off the stable. Mistress Holt, Mr. Barrow." He bowed again, more shallowly, and went out. The 3 liveried riders mounted in the yard, and the coach turned in the yard. Marjorie stood at the hearth and did not move until the sound of the wheels had passed the cross and faded down the slope toward Wilford. When she went down the cellar stair, Edmund Carrow was sitting where she had left him, the riding-coat still round his shoulders. "I heard," he said. "I supposed. He will come back. He will come back the moment Sir Rowland tells him to. We have 2 days, perhaps 3. He looked at her for a long beat with an expression she could not afford to read. "You did not give me up." "No." "You could have." "I could not." "Why?" "Because you were not dead yet." It was the answer she had given him the first time he had asked, and they both knew it for what it was. He looked away into the cellar dark. "Lift the flagstone," he said. They lifted it together, she with her father's iron bar and he with the toe of his good boot, and they brought up the small sealed strong-box from a bed of dry sand the late 6th Duke of Wilford had laid himself. The wax around the lid was unbroken. The Wilford seal, the wolf and spray Marjorie had seen on the inn's ledger pages whenever a Carrow rent had passed through Holt's Cross, was unbroken too. Edmund Carrow knelt down on his good knee on the packed earth floor and put both his palms flat on the lid, and stayed that way for a long moment without speaking, and when he lifted his face again to her, there were tears in it that he did not try to hide. Marjorie, standing above him in the cellar dark, with her father's bar in her hand, understood that this was a thing she would carry to her grave. "He kept it," Edmund said. "He kept it for me. All these years he kept it here in your father's cellar where my uncle would never look." "My father kept it for him?" "Yes. And then my father kept his mouth shut about it until the night he was dying, and he told me to keep the 3rd flagstone clear and never to lift it for any man, unless his name was Wilford." Edmund looked up at her. "He told you this on his deathbed?" "He told me this on the morning he died. I was 23. I had not understood. I had assumed it was the fever talking. I have kept the 3rd flagstone clear for 3 winters anyway, because my father had asked me to, and a thing he asked of me on the morning he died was the kind of thing I did not need to understand to do." She set the bar down on the flagstone and lowered herself onto the upended barrel beside him in the cold. "We need to get this, and you off the moor before Sir Rowland's man comes back," she said. "We need to put it and you in front of a magistrate who is not in Sir Rowland's pocket. We need a solicitor who can produce the original instruction of deposit. We need the axle pin. We need Tom to speak to what he saw. We need your gamekeeper if he is alive. We need everything, and we need it inside 3 days. Hollis is in York. Aspinall is at Wilford, if my uncle has not turned him out. The pin is upstairs under your mattress. Tom is here. The magistrate at York Sessions is Sir Howard Lascelles, who served with my father in the militia and who will not be bought. Then we send Tom for Aspinall tonight on the best horse left in my stable. We send Mrs. Brindle to the vicar at Wilford-on-the-Moor at first light. We borrow a coach from your gamekeeper at dusk tomorrow. We make York by the second night. Edmund looked at her. You are coming with us. I am coming with you. The pin and the box are not enough without the woman who lifted you. I am the only living human who saw the wheel before Sir Rowland's grooms carried it off the moor. My deposition is the load-bearing piece of paper. I am coming. He will move on you the moment my body is not produced at the sessions. I know. He will move on Annie. I know. They sat for a long time in the cellar dark. The fire upstairs had burnt itself low. Marjorie could hear Annie's small footstep above them on the kitchen flag, very faint, very contained, the child making her own quiet round of the kitchen, as she had every evening of her short life. Marjorie. Yes. You cannot stand in any court in Yorkshire as a witness against a baronet of Sir Rowland's, standing without my name on you. She had been expecting him to say it. She had been expecting him to say it since the moment he had told her about the third flagstone. She had been expecting it, and yet, hearing it, she felt her breath go out of her body for a second as if she had been struck in the ribs. Do not, she said. Hear me. Edmund, hear me. I have nothing else to give you that will keep you and the child standing through the next year. I have a name. I have a name that has had a great deal taken out of it, but that is still the name that will close any court in this county against my uncle the moment it is spoken correctly. If I die in the next month and he succeeds, your inn is his within the quarter, and the child is in the parish workhouse by Michaelmas, and you have known that since the morning his man stood at your hearth. If I live and you are not bound to me, he will move on you anyway, because you are the only living witness to a wheel he paid a wheelwright to cut. The only way I keep you and Annie out of his reach is to give you my name before I walk into Sir Howard's chamber. I am not asking this as what you think I am asking it. I am asking it as the cleanest thing I have left to do for you. You kept me. Let me keep you. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the small, bright wax seal of the strong-box. You will not say a word to me about love, Edmund Carow. Not in this cellar, not in this hour. I am not. Good. But I will not lie to you either, Marjorie. There will be a time after the Sessions House when I will say it. I am giving you fair warning so that you may be ready to refuse it or accept it or sit with it for a year, however you like. That is fair warning. Yes. Then I accept the proposal as you have made it, for Annie, for the inn, for the pin, for your father's ledgers, for my own neck. I will not pretend any of those reasons is the only one. She turned and looked at him then, in the cellar dark, with the small unbroken seal of his father's strong-box at his knee. I will marry you at dawn the day before the sessions, she said. Reverend Goodlake at Wilford-on-the-Moor will issue the licence to a Carow without a question, and he is no friend of your uncle. He will marry us in my tap-room with Mrs. Brindle and Tom for witnesses and Annie at the hearth. We will go to York from the wedding. I will not put on a dress. I will not be at any altar. I will be married standing in my own tap-room at the table where I splintered your leg, and I will speak my piece, and we will go. Edmund Carow inclined his head with a gravity that, in any other room in any other century, would have looked like the beginning of a bow. Mistress Holt, he said, your grace. She had meant it as plainness, and he received it as plainness, and neither of them smiled, and yet the corner of his mouth moved a very little, and her own moved a very little, and the cellar held its breath. Upstairs, Annie was walking from the kitchen dresser to the kitchen hearth, 3 small steps and 3 small steps back, the way she did every night, learning the shape of the room she was kept in. Marjorie listened to her go and come and go and come, and she pressed the heel of her hand against the wax seal of the late 6th Duke of Wilford's strong-box, and she let the truth of the next 4 days settle into her chest like a stone going into water. Tom Reedman left at dusk on the strongest horse left in the stable. Marjorie watched the lantern of him go down the slope toward Wilford until the moor swallowed it. Mrs. Brindle went at first light, walking in a black shawl, as if to a funeral, with a folded note inside her bodice for the Reverend Goodlake at the small parish of Wilford on the Moor, and a second one for the senior gamekeeper Mr. Caleb Aspinall at the Wilford Estate Cottage. The notes were short. The notes asked for 2 things and named no 4th person. Edmund slept 3 hours in the small east bedroom and rose without complaint, and sat in the kitchen with the strong box in front of him, and broke the seal himself in Marjorie's presence, and lifted out his father's hand, and laid it flat on her deal table. The ledgers were bound in vellum and ribboned in faded green silk, and the late 6th Duke had written his own marginal notes on every quarter return for 2 years and 3 months before his death. Edmund did not weep over them. He had wept once for what they meant. He read them now as a man reads the marks of a hand he has missed. It was the longest day Marjorie had ever lived through. By dusk she was alone in the kitchen with the door shut. Edmund was up the stair with Annie on his good knee, teaching her in a low voice the names of the carved beasts on the back of his father's signet. A private hour the 2 of them had taken without asking her, because he had understood that Marjorie needed a clear hour to herself before the morning. Mrs. Brindle was still on the road from the vicar's. Tom was still in the lane. The road was open, and the road was now Sir Rowland's, and Marjorie, with her back against the deal table, understood that the next 12 hours were the only 12 hours of her life in which she would be entirely alone with what she had agreed to. She did not cry. She thought about Thomas instead. She thought about the morning Thomas had ridden out of the yard at 21, and how she had kissed him at the gate, and how she had not known then that the next time she would see him would be in the small east bedroom with his eyes already wandering and his hands already cold. She thought about her father at the kitchen hearth in the last week of his life, telling her about the 3rd flagstone with the willow tea cooling in his hand. She thought of Annie at the front door in a basket lined with sacking, 10 months old, with a paper tucked into the shawl that said only, "Her name is for you to give." She had kept all of them. She had kept the inn, and she had kept Annie, and she had kept her father's word about the cellar, and she had kept the Duke alive through 14 nights of fever, and she had done it because there had been no one else who would, and she had not asked before now what it had cost her to do. It had cost her, she understood, sitting alone in her own kitchen with the fire going down, every part of herself that knew how to ask for anything in return. She set her forehead on the deal table. For one long count of breath she allowed herself to be a woman who was very tired and very alone, and then she lifted her head and put another stick on the fire, and she fetched down her mother's grey wool shawl from the press in the parlour for the morning, because she would be married in her own clothes, and she would be married standing, but she would be married in something her mother had spun, and she would not be photographed by any eye in that tap-room in anything less than her own self. She heard a step above her on the kitchen ceiling. Edmund, on the stair, with Annie carried on his good arm. They came down together. Annie was already half asleep, with her cheek against the cloth at his collar, the small hand fisted in his shirt over his heart. Edmund stopped at the foot of the stair. "She would not let me put her down," he said very quietly. "She does that, to me also, once she has chosen." Marjorie. Edmund. "Whatever you have decided in this room tonight, I will be at the deal table at first light, and I will be standing with you when the vicar comes. You do not have to say anything to me now." She came across the kitchen and lifted Annie out of his arm and settled her against her own shoulder, and the child gave a soft, sleeping protest at the change of warmth, and then settled. Marjorie did not look at Edmund. She looked at the side of Annie's head against her own collarbone. "I have not changed my mind," she said. "I will not change my mind. Go up. Sleep. I want the man at the deal table at dawn to have slept." "Yes." "And Edmund." "Yes." "Thank you. For the hour with the child." He went up. She stood in the kitchen a long while with the child against her, and she watched the fire go down to its last red, and she said aloud, into the empty room, the line she had been turning in her teeth since she had heard her own voice in the cellar. Marjorie Holt. Stay. It was the only vow she allowed herself that night. It would have to be enough. She heard a horse in the yard at 3 hours past midnight. She was on her feet in the kitchen before the rider had dismounted, with Annie still in her arms. The kitchen door opened on Tom Reedman, his face raw with cold, his coat white with frost, and behind him in the yard a second horse with a tall, heavily built man in his 50s at the bridle, a man in a green coat and a wool muffler who had brought a saddle pack and a long oilcloth-wrapped parcel from Wilford. Tom let him in. Mr. Caleb Aspinall took his hat off in her doorway and bowed his head once, very fully, to Marjorie Holt of Holt's Cross. He did not speak for a long beat. He had been the late 6th Duke of Wilford's senior gamekeeper for 19 years, and Marjorie understood, looking at him in her kitchen, that he had been waiting for this hour for 10 of those years. "Mistress Holt," he said. His voice was rough from the cold and from feeling. "Mr. Tom has told me on the ride up. I have brought the late Duke's pheasant book and his last letters. I have a borrowed coach in the lane that will carry 6. Mr. Hollis, the solicitor, will meet us at the King's Head in York at noon tomorrow. The vicar will be at your taproom at dawn. We will be at Sir Howard Lascelles' chamber at the Sessions House at 3 o'clock, where Sir Rowland will be at the same hour for the reading of a will he has bespoken in his own favour. I am at your service. I am at his Grace's service. I have been at the service of the late Duke for 10 years that he has been dead. I have kept his book." Marjorie looked at him, with Annie heavy on her shoulder. "Then we are all of us up the same road, Mr. Aspinall." "Yes, mistress." "Sit down, Mrs. Brindle." Following on foot from the vicar's mistress, slower for her age. "Sit down. There is broth on the hob." Mr. Aspinall sat. Tom Reedman, 16 years old and white with cold and pride, sat. Marjorie laid Annie on her pallet at the kitchen hearth and went up the back stair to the small east bedroom, and she said to the man on the bed without raising her voice, "Aspinall is here. The vicar comes at dawn. The coach is in the lane. We go to York in the morning." Edmund Carrow opened his eyes and looked at her in the dark. "Marjorie." "Yes." "You stayed." She stood in the doorway with the lamp in her hand. After a moment she said, "I stayed." He closed his eyes. She went down to the kitchen and the men at her hearth, and she did not allow herself to look back up the stair. The Reverend Goodlake came at dawn in his travelling cassock with a special licence folded inside his prayer book, and Marjorie Holt was married to Edmund Carrow, 7th Duke of Wilford, at the deal table in the kitchen of Holt's Cross at 6:30 in the morning of the 2nd of March, 1825. Mrs. Brindle wept silently at her shoulder. Tom Reedman held the wrapped axle pin like a chalice. Mr. Aspinall stood at the kitchen door. Annie watched from her stool by the hearth. Marjorie wore her plain working dress and her mother's grey wool shawl across her shoulders. She did not let go of Edmund's hand from the moment the vicar opened the book to the moment the vicar closed it. She said her piece flatly and without ornament. Edmund said his piece in a voice that no one in that kitchen had ever heard from a man of his rank, and when the vicar pronounced them, he lifted Marjorie's hand and kissed the knuckle of her ring finger, where Mrs. Brindle's late mother's plain gold band had just been placed, and that was the only ceremony either of them allowed themselves. The borrowed coach took the Moor road at 7. Edmund himself drove the first 2 stages because he could not sit still and because his good leg could work the brake. Mr. Aspinall rode beside him. Marjorie sat inside with Annie on her lap, the strong box at her feet, the axle pin in her own basket beside her, under the folded grey shawl, and Mrs. Brindle at her shoulder. Tom Reedman rode behind with his eyes on the road. They reached the King's Head in York at noon. Mr. Septimus Hollis was waiting in the parlour, with the 1817 instruction of deposit on his lap, and an expression of relief on his thin face that Marjorie would remember the rest of her life. The York Sessions House at 3 o'clock was full of grey light. Sir Howard Lascelles, 58, with a soldier's shoulders and a magistrate's iron quiet, sat at the head of the long oak table. The room was set for a reading of a will. Sir Rowland Carrow was already in the second chair, smiling small at something the clerk had said. He was a handsome man at 51, and a charming one. Marjorie understood at the door, looking at him for the first time in her life, exactly why the women of his county had not believed any of the things they had quietly suspected of him these 10 years. Marjorie walked in first. She was on Edmund's good arm. He wore his father's coat and his father's signet. Behind them came Mr. Hollis with the 1817 instruction, Mr. Aspinall with the pheasant book, Tom Reedman with the wrapped axle pin, and Mrs. Brindle holding Annie's hand. The whole room went still. Sir Rowland Carrow rose to his feet very slowly out of the second chair. His face did not yet know what it was going to do. "Edmund," he said. "Uncle." "You were—" "I was not, as you see." Sir Howard Lascelles, who had not stood, looked from one to the other across the long table. "Your Grace," he said, and the title fell into the room and changed it. "Will you sit?" "I will stand, Sir Howard, if it please you. My wife the Duchess will sit." Marjorie sat at the chair he drew for her at his side. She put the basket with the axle pin on the table. She put the strong-box beside it. She put her own folded deposition, written out in her own hand at the King's Head over the noon hour, on top of the strong-box. She did not look at Sir Rowland Carrow at all. She kept her eyes on Sir Howard Lascelles' face. "Sir Howard," Edmund said, in a voice she had never heard him use, "I had the honour to be my father's son. He died on the Wilford estate in October of the year 14, on a beat my uncle the present claimant had altered on the morning of the shoot. I was 12. I am 23 years and 24 days old today. I came of age 3 weeks ago. I took the road to confront the gentleman seated at your left. I did not arrive. My coach was wrecked on the Moor road above Holt's Cross on the night of the 4th of February of this year. My coachman, Pickering, died at the wreck. I did not, because the woman seated at my right walked the moor at dawn and pulled me from the coach with a sledge. She fetched herself and kept me alive at her inn through 14 days of fever, after she had set my broken leg with her own hands. I have here the offside front axle pin of that coach, recovered from the snow on the 3rd clear day by the apprentice of my dead coachman, who is standing behind me. I have here the original sealed estate ledgers of the late Duke of Wilford, my father, deposited at Holt's Cross in March of the year 17 by my father himself, in the presence of Mr. Hollis here, against precisely this day. I have here Mr. Hollis's instruction of deposit. I have here Mr. Aspinall, my father's senior gamekeeper, who carried my father's pheasant book for 10 years against this hour. I have here the Duchess of Wilford's signed deposition. I came here, Sir Howard, on the day my uncle had appointed for the reading of a will that names himself heir, to inform the court that I am alive, and to lay these things before you." Sir Howard Lascelles put both his hands flat on the table. "Sir Rowland," he said. Sir Rowland Carrow had not yet sat down. His hands were not quite steady on the back of the chair he had risen from. "This is a fabrication," he said. "Edmund, whatever this woman—" "My wife," Edmund said. The smile started on Sir Rowland's face and could not finish itself. Marjorie rose from her chair. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised her voice once in 14 days. "My name is Marjorie Carrow, Duchess of Wilford, née Holt, of Holt's Cross Inn upon the Moor road of this county. I was married this morning at 6:30 o'clock by special licence by the Reverend Goodlake of Wilford on the Moor, at my own kitchen table, in the presence of the 4 people standing behind my husband. My deposition is on this table, the pin is on this table, the strong-box is on this table, Mr. Hollis's instruction is on this table, Mr. Aspinall's book is on this table." She turned her face to Sir Rowland Carrow for the first time. She held his eye. "6 nights I kept the fire and your nephew alive. 6 nights you sent men to count him as dead. The court can decide whose hands belong on Wilford." The room was perfectly still. Sir Howard Lascelles opened the strong-box. He read the first 3 pages in silence. He read the 1817 instruction. He weighed the cracked pin in his palm. He looked once, briefly, at Mr. Aspinall. He set everything down and lifted his head and addressed the senior clerk at the side desk with the formula that the small parish histories of York have remembered for 2 centuries. "Hold Sir Rowland Carrow at the Sessions House pending charge of attempted murder of a peer of this realm and of fraud against the Wilford estate. The reading of the purported testament of His Grace the 7th Duke of Wilford is dismissed. The testator stands here alive." Sir Rowland Carrow did not move when the two clerks came round the table. He looked for a long blank second at the face of his nephew across the long oak. There was nothing in his own face. He had spent 10 years building the face he wore, and it could not, in this hour, find anything in itself to do. He was taken from the chamber. Edmund Carrow sat down in the chair beside his wife and put his head into his hands, and was, for a count of perhaps 8, not the Duke of Wilford at all, but a young man of 23 years and 24 days, who had just heard his father's name spoken correctly in a court of the realm for the first time since he was 12. Marjorie put her hand on the back of his neck and kept it there. Annie, behind them, in Mrs. Brindle's lap, said the first sentence she had spoken in that company. "Mamma." It was a small, clear sound. Edmund Carrow lifted his head. He looked at the child. He looked at his wife. He did not yet speak. He had not needed to. Outside the high east window of the magistrate's chamber it had begun, very softly, to rain. The rain melted what was left of the Moor's last snow on the slate of the Sessions House roof, and the sound of the running water down the lead was the sound that Marjorie Carrow, Duchess of Wilford, would later say she had heard all the rest of her life, as the sound of the day she became a woman with a name on her. 18 months later, in the late spring of the year 26, the Wilford East garden was in first bloom. The gravel walk ran from the south door of the seat down between two long lines of pear trees to the orchard wall, where a small iron gate stood open onto the meadow. Annie Carrow, 5 years old, formally adopted at the parish font of Wilford on the Moor, and entered on the register in her own true name, was at the top of the gravel walk in a white pinafore with her shoes off. Edmund stood at the orchard gate with his arms open. Marjorie stood at the south door at the head of the walk in a pale grey morning dress. 6 months gone with their first child, a son who would be named Henry for the late 6th Duke. She was leaning a little on the doorframe, as she allowed herself to do now, when no one was looking. Annie looked once over her shoulder at Marjorie, and once down the long walk at Edmund, and she began to run. She ran the whole length of it. It was the longest unbroken sentence of motion she had ever produced. Halfway down the walk she opened her mouth and she said, clear as glass on the warm air, "Papa, Mama." Edmund caught her at the orchard gate. Marjorie, at the south door, did not move for a long count of breath. Mr. Caleb Aspinall, who had been promoted from senior gamekeeper to estate steward in the spring, stood at her elbow at a polite distance with the morning's books in his arms. He had heard the child. He cleared his throat once, very quietly, and walked away into the south corridor without saying a word. Mrs. Eliza Brindle, who was now housekeeper at Wilford, came up behind Marjorie and put a teacup into her hand without comment, and stood there with her, until Edmund had carried Annie back up the walk. Tom Reedman ran Holt's Cross now, with a new wife from the village of Wilford on the Moor, and the sign freshly painted. The Wilford estate had repaired the Moor road at its own expense in the autumn after the sessions. A small plain stone at the bend past the larch read, in the local letter, Cutter's Hand, simply Pickering, with the year. The cracked pin had gone to the assize at Newgate. Sir Rowland Carrow was held there still, awaiting trial, which the county solicitors expected by Michaelmas. The original Wilford ledgers had been read end to end and audited. The accounts were now in honest hand again. The strong box itself stood empty in the Wilford library, lid open, on the second shelf of the late 6th Duke's writing desk, like a thing finished. Marjorie looked at it every morning when she came down for her tea. The Reverend Goodlake had married them again, by full ceremony, and by their own request, at the parish church of Wilford on the Moor, on the morning of the 1st of May. The whole village had come up. Marjorie had worn her mother's grey wool shawl over a pale dress made up for her at York. She had not changed her mind about the manner of the first wedding, and she had not changed her mind about the manner of the second. Both had been hers, and both had been Edmund's, and the second had been a public thing done for the village to see, because a village needs to see a thing of that kind done in good light. That evening, after Annie had been put to bed by Mrs. Brindle and the household had gone quiet, Edmund came to find his wife in the small library at the end of the east corridor, where she had taken to sitting after supper. "Marjorie." "Yes." "Walk with me." She rose, and they went out together onto the south terrace, and from the south terrace through the orchard gate, and out by the meadow path that Edmund had been able to use again, only since the leg had fully mended in the autumn, and from the meadow path up the long shoulder of moor that lifted, behind Wilford, to the high road where the wreck had been. Edmund had asked her once in the first month at Wilford whether she could walk that ground again. She had told him she could. They had not gone up to it together until tonight. The light was pink off the western hills. The grass was new and the bracken had not yet come up. The road past the cross at Holt's Cross was visible in the distance below them, a thin grey line. Tom's lamp was lit at the inn. Edmund stopped at the place where she had found him. He stood there for a long time without speaking. He had brought no flowers, there was no marker. The place was only a small dip in the gorse with a single stunted larch above it. "My father's name was Henry Edmund Carow," he said at last, into the wind. "He was the 6th Duke of Wilford. He was 41 years old when he died. He liked his pheasants. He liked his wife. He liked his son. He was murdered on a beat his brother altered. I will name my son for him at the font in September, if you will let me." "I will let you." He turned his face to her. "Marjorie." "Yes." "I love you. I have for 9 months. I'm telling you now because we are standing on the ground where you kept me, and the place has earned the saying of it." She did not look away from him. "I had supposed," she said. "I know. I love you, Edmund. I have for rather longer. It does not matter, I think, how long." He took her hand. He did not kiss her. He had kissed her many times by now, and there was no need. They stood together on the small dip in the gorse for some minutes more, and after a while Edmund Carow, 7th Duke of Wilford, husband of Marjorie Carow, father of Annie Carow, and of a son not yet born, set his free hand against the small visible round of his wife's belly under the pale grey dress, and said, very quietly, into the moor wind, "I will keep him." The wound word passed from her, keeping into his. Marjorie Carow leaned her cheek against the shoulder of her husband's coat, and watched the lamp at Holt's Cross burning steadily 4 miles down the slope, where a 16-year-old boy she had raised was pouring beer for the night coach to York, and she did not say anything at all. Above them, on the high moor, a thin late evening rain began to come down, the kind that on a winter night 3 years before had blown for 3 days, and closed a road and dropped a young duke into the snow 8 yards from a dead coachman. Tonight it only smelt of grass and of pear blossom. It did not close the road. It would not. They walked home down the meadow path in the rain together, and the south door of Wilford was open, and the lamps were lit, and Annie's small bare feet pattered across the long hall to meet them.